I'm here with Neil Boyle and Kirk Henry to talk about Kensuke's Kingdom film. Uh, I want to start to say, guys, that I have suffered too much watching the film. I cry a lot, but the things that happen in these films is one of the reason because I'm vegan and I hate shoes, for example. So thank you very much to tell the story.
Hey, you're very welcome. It was a pleasure to make, and we're glad that you enjoyed it and reacted to it.
Yeah, it's a really good film. So I want to start with talking about Kensuke's Kingdom is actually a novel. How did you find it, and what inspired you so much about the story that you want to bring it to the big screen?
Well, originally, the first thing Neil and I read was actually the screenplay by Frank Cottrell Boyce. So we weren't actually aware of the book at that time. I don't think we'd sort of slipped through the net in terms of ages. We were sort of too old to read it as kids because it wasn't out when we were kids, and then probably too had kids too early, even for when the book came out. But so we read the screenplay when Sarah Radcliffe, the original producer, got in touch with us. And what Frank had done crucially with the script that was different in the book was to take all the dialogue out of it. So Kensuke and Michael couldn't speak to each other anymore. So that when we read the script, it gave it to us. The first thing we noticed as filmmakers was that this is an opportunity for silent filmmaking. You know, the old school silent filmmaking where you're using body language and editing and blocking and music to tell the story rather than talking to tell the story. So, which is what me and Neil really like. So and immediately we saw an opportunity for that, for cinematic storytelling. So that got us excited. And then we read the book, which we also like. But it was really, so yeah, the initial excitement as filmmakers was the sort of cinematic storytelling, but also the themes that are inherent in the book are also certainly worth telling, and certainly worth telling now more than ever. So it's very rich in themes.
Yeah, I think one thing that Kirk and I responded to immediately with the screenplay and then going back to the book is it's really, really unusual that you have a story that's a fantastic adventure story that works for all ages, whether you're children or grandparents.
Yeah.
Fantastic adventure story, but there is a message in there, or several messages in there, which are really worthwhile. And usually films tend to be either a message thing or an action adventure thing, but very rarely are they both. And this was a fabulous story for us to direct.
And how was that process? How did you approach the adaptation process of bringing such a beloved children's book to the screen? That you say is work for children and for adults to watch.
Well, I think Kirk and I pretty much always we're both fascinated by storytelling, and our approach is just to make sure that we tell the story as well as we can, and we're not particularly thinking about children or adults. We just, it's about just what's the most dramatic thing that makes the story work. And I mean, the other thing we were very careful to do was that we always wanted to keep sight of what Michael Morpurgo had written. And Michael Morpurgo collaborated with us, as did Frank Cottrell Boyce's screenwriter, all the way through. So any ideas Kirk and I had about telling the story in a cinematic way, we ran past them to make sure they were happy with it and that we were staying true to the original themes of the book, which luckily we were. And so it was a fabulously collaborative period, and everyone seems very, very happy that although the film isn't exactly like the book, we've had to adapt things. At its heart, it still tells the same, it has the same heart as the book.
And about the direction, guys, how was work together for this film, directing this film?
Good. I mean, Neil and I have a lot of shared influences in the history of the movies. Obviously being a similar age, we had similar formative influences, but also as we became adults, we got interested in the history of cinema, and we like a lot of the same things. And they tend to be people that tell stories cinematically you know, using that Hitchcockian silent film technique. So, but in terms of splitting up the work, we didn't really. I mean, Neil has an animation background that I don't have, and I have a sort of design compositing background that Neil doesn't have. So sometimes we would focus more in on that individually, but generally you know, the day-to-day running of things where we would be reviewing rushes and deciding where things were going to go and feeding back to heads of department, we would just do everything together. So, and you know, and we agreed most of the time, which you know, you're never going to agree 100. No two people are ever going to agree 100% of the time, but we probably agreed 70% of the time. So the 30% we didn't agree, we actually had this thing where we would eventually find what we would call a third way. You know, if one of us said, "How about doing this?" and the other disagreed, "I want to do this," we would eventually decide, okay, well, we're not going to do either of those things. We're going to find a solution that maybe incorporates, you know, understanding what the other person was trying to get at, even if you thought their idea wasn't quite right. When you understand what they're trying to say, you can maybe find a solution that's different but ticks that box. And we would always come up with this third thing that was always better than either of our original ideas. So, you know, it was like a third person created those ideas in the end.
And well, I want to talk about the music in the sounds in the film. The film makes great use of silence and music to enhance the storytelling. So, can you talk about the role of sound design in creating the atmosphere on the film?
I mean, the first thing to say about music is our collaboration with Stuart Hancock, our composer, who's a wonderful, amazingly talented composer, as you've heard from watching the film. And both Kirk and I had a working relationship with Stuart already, and we worked very comfortably together. And one of the things we wanted to avoid with this film, see how most films are made, is you make the film and you edit it and you do all sorts of stuff, and then in the last few weeks somebody comes in and sticks music over it, and it's almost like an afterthought. And Kirk and I absolutely did not want to approach it that way. So from the very first day of beginning, even before we started drawing and while we were working on the script, we involved Stuart Hancock. And as we were doing stuff, we would send him stuff and he would say, "Oh, you know, that gives me an idea." And he'd maybe play something on the piano and send that to us. When we listened to his music, that then inspired us. It created images in our head. So we did some images and we kept batting it backwards and forwards like that, so that the imagery and the script, the dialogue, the small amount of dialogue there is, and the music were all like this. They were all evolving at the same time. Kirk, you should talk about sound and music.
Yeah, well, both really. I mean, in terms of how do we approach sound design, we approach sound design in the same way that we approached anything, color, design, music, and that how in this moment, in this scene, can it reiterate the character or the story or what the character's thinking in their head. You know, it's always a narrative function for these techniques. And I mean, as you rightly say, you know, the silence can be one of the most effective things in a film. But silence is still a sound design or a musical decision. You know, we as directors and composers, and Will Cohen, our great sound designer, you know, when you're choosing to put sound in, that is still a music or a sound decision. It's not just, okay, well, I can't think of any music to go in here. You know, it's gonna be silent. It's always like, what is the most effective thing? And also, if you're doing very noisy, if there's a lot of sound design and music going on at any given moment, like in the storm sequence or any action sequence, you know, and you want to try and make something stand out, you know, you don't do that by making it go louder. You do it by having the sound drop out for like half a second, and then you bring the sound back in again, and it makes it seem doubly powerful. So otherwise, it just becomes this big white noise level of you know, of loudness that has the audience gets what's the word, Neil? They become
Fatigued.
They get fatigued by it, and they don't. When you hear a loud thing, for, you know, when you put your Walkman on sometimes and you turn it up louder and you have it on for like 5 minutes, and suddenly you don't notice the loudness anymore, so you turn it up again until finally you can't go anywhere. You're at full volume and you haven't even noticed it. It's a bit like that. So you need spaces to allow breathing space, even if they're only half a second before you bring noise back in, and those things are always fun to to play with because they're extremely effective when they work.
No, the sound and the music in the film is amazing, guys. Completely amazing.
Okay.
And
Pass it on. We'll pass it
um, can you talk or can you describe the animation style that you choose for this film and why?
I mean, one of the reasons we ended up with the style we did was almost a logical reason, which is that we didn't ever want the film to get too cartoony. We're obviously using hand-drawn animation, but we don't belong to the world of cartooniness. And the reason was that we really needed the audience to feel that, that the characters could die on this island, that Michael could starve or he could dehydrate. If he slips and falls over, he could break a leg. So you need the audience to feel that there are real stakes here and they're not just cartoon characters that can kind of stand up and put themselves back together again. So starting from that point, it meant that the island itself and the environments around Michael and Kensuke had to be quite lush and detailed. So, but having said that, we also didn't want to end up just reproducing reality and trying to look like a photograph, because then what's the point? You just go and photograph it. And Kirk and I both like, we talk a lot about matte paintings, which are those old, in old Hollywood, where they used to extend, but put a castle on a hill that didn't exist and they paint the castle in. And it's kind of realistic, but it kind of isn't. It's sort of this lovely theatrical thing where you can believe it, but it isn't 100% photographically real. And that was one of the things we said to our art director, Mike Shorten, is, look at the matte paintings of the 40s and 50s and 60s, and where you might put an awful lot of detail around where the audience is looking, but then as you go off to the edges, it can get a little bit impressionistic and a little bit more painterly. So that was one of the ways we approached the look of this film.
And what were the technical challenge involved in creating the animation for the film?
There's the real challenge I would personally find is the schedule, and this is the same with all films, is that especially a feature, you have such a huge volume of things to complete, 1,200 shots, that it's always just, that's the volume and the time you have to do it is always the greatest challenge. And the rest of them are sort of artistic challenges that, you're kind of used to dealing with in a certain way, working out how the story plays out, working out how the performance should go, feeding that back to the animator and working with the animator to get that performance. And often animators will, come back at something that will surprise you, that you like, and you keep that in there. But there was sort of the part of the artistic approach to something that, judging from your experience, isn't that insurmountable. The thing that always seems insurmountable is the volume and the amount of time you have to do it. I mean, Neil, you've done this a lot more than me with animation. What would you add on to that?
I mean, no, I totally agree. As Kirk says, it's the amount of work to get done in a feature film. But on a technical level, I guess there were maybe two interesting things that happened. Both Kirk and I like to put the camera at a subjective point of view. So, if Stella is looking up at Michael, we put the camera down where Stella would be, which means you're looking up at Michael, kind of up his nose a little bit. And so we have a lot of these very cinematic angles, which are terrifically nice and dynamic, but they're really hard to draw. And they drove our animators crazy. But we had a fantastic animation director called Peter Dodd, who's terrific at anatomy, and he helped all the animators and get some of these quite unusual angles. And the other thing that was a bit of a challenge, because we were making this film during lockdown, was to get all the animal action authentic enough that the animals felt naturalistic and not like kind of Disney animals, walking on their hind legs, walking, talking. You had to feel like these are real animals. And we had a fantastic lead animator called Ludivine Berthelou, French animator, who sort of supervised all the animation of Stella, the dog, but also all the animals on the island, whether they were orangutans down to a little bug on a leaf. She has a fantastic idea and empathy with animals, and she worked with all our animal animators to make sure that we kept the animal animation like really naturalistic and believable. That was hard, and it just meant a lot of reference, looking at videos, looking on YouTube, because like I say, it was lockdown. We couldn't even go out to a zoo or anywhere like that, couldn't go on location. So we had to rely on videos and film sources and BBC Natural History Unit and so on, stuff like that, to really understand how these animals move and think. That was quite challenging.
And talking about the animals, I'm really curious to know what is the importance and role of animals for you guys
in our lives.
In terms of the
Yeah.
story, or in our lives?
Yeah, to tell this story.
Well, in the story,
Oh.
we were really using, well, one of the main themes in the story is families. You know, your blood family, your adopted families, or the broader family of interspecies relationships, which Kensuke has with the orangutans, and we often have with our own pets. And so we wanted to really assign all of the animals on the island to show that they had families too, just like Michael does. But also not just because, you know, Michael could then relate to them in that way, that he was missing his family and that they had families, but also, of course, the poachers are going to come and take those animals away. And it's not just taking an animal away, you're separating somebody from their family. So we wanted it to mean something when they were taken, and also to reiterate the general theme of the film. So they were a very important part of the film for us.
And just having pets. I mean, I've definitely had pets, generally cats, all my life. So not exotic animals, but it is extraordinary how these animals come into your life and are 100% part of your family. And people that don't have pets or aren't close to animals think that humans are crazy when they're grieving, you know, when an animal dies. But it is like losing a member of your family. I mean, it really is. And you know, when I was growing up, and I was quite a shy little kid, I spent forever with my, you know, beloved cat, you know, and I kind of so you have that empathy with Michael and Stella and how he has to be everywhere with Stella because they're a little unit. They're growing up together, and he will never forget that dog for the rest of his life.
Perfect. Well, guys, I have 100 questions for you, but we don't have more time. Just to finish, if you can invite to the audience in Chile to watch the film, the cinema, please.
I'd love to come one day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the question?
Oh, if you can invite to the audience in Chile to watch the film on the cinema.
Yes. Okay. Well, we implore everybody to come and see the film. We've put, you know, a lot of effort into it, and all the audiences that have seen it so far have really enjoyed it. So we think you will too. Bring the kids. It's a family film.
Brilliant. I thought you were inviting us to the Albion Cinema, but we'd like to come. But yeah.
Oh, you can go. No, actually, I'm in Ireland, so wherever you want. We are close. Well, guys, thank you very much for your time, and congratulations again for this film. Thank you so much.
Benjamin.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your questions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.